Hey everyone, welcome to How to Fix Your Script. This is our overview of the rewrite process. Let's get going. So we're on a stage channel, so this is going to require you to click that hand-raising icon if you want to speak out loud, and then once you're invited to the stage, you will have to click that Accept Invitation button. This is Script Camp. We are a screenwriting community that's focused on taking you from idea to finished draft. We have lots of free classes, table reads, script swaps, writers groups, and other weekly activities. We're part of Skill Camp, which is the name of our nonprofit that offers free and low-cost classes to help you learn new skills and meet your life goals. And you can see our many other servers that we have here, including WordCamp for novel writing that has classes every Saturday, 12 to 2, in writing novels. We have TV and feature writing classes here on Script Camp, including boot camps, which are starting soon. On the 17th is our new session of Feature Bootcamp, where we will go all the way through a brand new draft of a brand new script. So that's going to be running from 6 to 8 p.m. PST starting on the 17th on Fridays. And we have TV Pilot Bootcamp starting 2 days afterwards on the 19th. That's going to be running Sundays 10 to noon Pacific time, and that is a 6-week course that takes you all the way to the new draft to a first draft of a new pilot. So if you're interested in doing these boot camps or persisting in any of these courses past just the first free week, you can sign up at scriptcamp.net. So head over to our website and you can scroll down and sign up for unlimited membership, which includes access to video library, which has recordings of all of our previous classes, $100 off of consultations and proofreads. We have writers labs, advanced lab, and other member exclusive channels and benefits. So definitely consider signing up for as low as just $19 a month if you buy yearly. If you're subscribing yearly, you will save 40%. Otherwise, it's just going to be $29 a month for access to every single thing on every server. So here's my brand new About Me page. I have been writing full-length scripts for about 12 years, moved to LA in 2015 with no connections, not knowing anyone at all here. Got signed 2 years later for the first time in 2017. Have since then worked as a horror thriller writer, setting up a few features around town and doing rewrites on low-budget movies. And I wrote an episode of Creepshow in 2019. I've been on a couple lists, which you can see here, and recently got advanced to second round of Sundance Labs. I teach the boot camps in the weekly Writers Lab. You can see, again, those times are here. Sundays 10 to noon, Fridays 6 to 8, Saturdays 12 to 2. Those are our 3 main boot camp time slots. So, we are moving into our rewriting overview. So if you don't have a finished script, then this class is not incredibly relevant for you until you have one, but obviously, once you have finished, then you might be wondering what to do next, or how do I go about improving it? How do I move on to the next project, having learned and gained things from this one? So the first thing you'll always need to do is receive feedback. We will talk about this and how to best get feedback in our class today. And at the end of this class, we will be setting up a swap, unless you want to weigh in and tell me something's working differently this time. Anybody sticking around can participate in the swap at the very end of this class, where you will find someone who will read your script and you'll read their scripts. Nacho, maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we have a Google form that you can fill out to participate in the swap. This is normally the form we use for our Tuesday session, but we're doing just a special thing just in case anyone, really needs feedback and they don't have it or they can't come to the Tuesday session. Just, fill out this form during today's class, and then right afterwards we'll have a little bit of time to arrange for a special swap, so just you can stick around in the same channel, but just be sure to submit your script using that Google form.
Thank you for that. So, a couple things before we go into the whole process. How should I start this one? I will say a script is only 90 to 100-ish pages, maybe up to 120 of entertainment. It's like an hour and a half of entertainment, so we shouldn't really be spending multiple years on a script. This is different than writing novels, where a novel is conceivably 50, 60 hours of entertainment, depending on how long it is etc. So it makes sense to take a year or two sometimes on writing a book, but it doesn't really work or fit into the logical process and flow of this to be spending years on scripts. You can't really be spending years on scripts if you want to have a career doing this. I'd recommend trying to, if you're writing features, write 3 or 4 of them a year, and if you're writing pilots, you could easily double that, because if you consider pilots are only 60 pages or 30 pages. So I would at least double that for pilots. So try to write maybe 5, 6 pilots a year if that's what you're doing. Aim for 3 or 4 features a year at the least if you can. Obviously, whatever you can do is entirely dependent on what you have going on in your life and everything else. So we understand it's not the end of the world if you can't always keep up with that, but try to be consistently doing new work, new material. You're going to hit a point of diminishing returns on a script where you're not actually improving it anymore by just continuing to rework it endlessly, which is why this is usually not a super great career field or type of writing to try out if you're like, I have these passion projects that I need to write, and this is meaningful to me, and if I don't get these movies made, my life is meaningless. It's really difficult to get a movie made. A movie's a company that employs up to 100 people or more and costs millions and millions and millions of dollars and moves up to $100 million around all over the world. It is not exactly easy to get a movie going. So, or a TV show, which is obviously running for years, employing hundreds of people and moving hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's not exactly something that's open to entry-level participants in it, and it is not something that is for casual participation. It takes years and years and years of work to get your skills where they need to be, to do the networking that you need to do, to learn all the skills that you need to have, or to learn all the social aspects that you need to be able to navigate, to make the connections, to put the skills into place, and then have the discipline to continually do those things and keep at it. Even as projects fall apart or you have setbacks or various things go wrong, you have to actually continue doing this for years and kind of break in again and again and again. I would know. I've been signed twice. So this is really tough. And as you're going into this, try to limit yourself and set an actual cutoff date for any particular script that you will maybe just say, I need to set this aside and work on something else for a while, because if it's taking longer than 6 months to write a script, then something is off. It's your job to write a lot of bad scripts to get to the sort of good ones, so to speak. And if you are getting stuck routinely or you're not finishing, then one of 2 problems is in place. One, either you haven't prepped enough, you need to be actually outlining more extensively, and we have lots of classes on that, or you have not given yourself permission to simply do a bad job. Or maybe you had some personal disaster that got in the way, which we cannot actually foresee or account for. But in any case, you're either not prepping enough, or you're giving yourself permission to do a bad job. It's okay to write a bad script. Your next one will be better. Nobody gets worse the more they practice at something. So you will just trend better over time. So don't get hung up on scripts that are passion projects that you've been rewriting or reworking. You just need to get it right. Don't get stuck on those. You need to actually write a lot of scripts to get where you need to be. But that said, let's get into rewrite, because rewriting is an important skill. While we don't want you to get stuck on this, you do need to be able to do it, and also to really carefully organize your process going into this so you can keep potentially a group of other people on board for what the story is and how it's changing, how it has changed, how it's going to change, all of these things. You have to become the script department for the movie, especially if you're doing a rewrite after many different drafts have been turned in by other different writers. I've done rewrite projects where I've had to go through 5 different drafts of the same script before by different people at different times over the course of 3 or 4 years. So you have to kind of be able to process and synthesize a lot of information. You have to know structure like the back of your hand and be able to break down structure instantly, really effectively, and then be able to rework structure, be able to, for instance, diagnose scenes that aren't really working or contributing and be able to move them around, take them out. Always be rewriting for things. When you're doing rewrites, you're polishing and adding things like emotional emphasis of scenes, so clarifying how the characters are changing on a scene-by-scene basis and all of this. But in any case, we have the basic overview laid out here. Number 1 is to just sort of set the draft aside for a bit and wait, I would say, a week or 2 if you can. Then you want to come back and, I haven't written this as a step, but move the script from draft 0, which would be a version that says the end at the finale, but at the end of the day has a lot of placeholders, problems, things missing, scenes missing, characters that change names halfway through, anything else that just makes it not really a full, complete draft. You'll need to actually move that up to draft 1 on your own before you share it with anyone, and I would never share your draft 0 vomit draft with anyone before. or I would not recommend doing that because we need to show the respect to our readers that we will be giving them our best work, and as a result, or as a way to repay them for giving us their generous time and attention, unless you're paying them, of course. You can always pay a reader. You can pay me to read if you go to our website. But in any case, if you're not paying them, then they're doing you a great favor in some sense. Like, unless you are doing something for them, a swap is a great way to make it so they're not doing you this huge favor. You're doing each other a favor, and that's why swaps and readings are a good way to get that feedback and to ensure someone actually does read and pay attention to the script. But in any case, to repay someone for their generous time and attention, we have to give them a draft that we have given our generous time and attention to, and we need to respect them enough to proofread really carefully for things like typos, missing words, grammar that doesn't add up or make sense, proofreading, spell checks, all of that basic stuff. And then beyond that you've done your due diligence and your best effort towards writing the most compelling, interesting story that you can. Obviously, no one has the right to get mad at you if it's not good. But the worst that can happen, essentially, is they stop reading, and they get bored, and they put it aside, and they don't finish, and they don't get back to you. So you have to anticipate that a lot of readers that are not being paid might just not read or finish the script. Okay, so you want to set the draft aside, come back to it, and then do your very best to move up to draft 1, as we would call it, meaning no placeholders. Completely finished, no typos. Next, you will send to your readers, and you'll get the feedback, whether it's through a swap, a reading, or anything else, just people reading it on their own. You will gather all their feedback and collect it all together in what we call the notes document. So that's one specific document that has all the reader reactions and notes that you've gotten on it. You then are going to make a re-outline, which is a new outline that reflects the version of the script that you have. So you're not outlining for how you want to change things. You're just writing a new set of scene cards reflecting the draft that you have currently. Then you're going to make a copy of the re-outline and combine it together with your notes document to create what we call the revision guide. And this is going to be sort of a step-by-step roadmap for rewriting and finishing the entire script. Then you're going to start your rewrite. You'll open to a blank page, page 1, and you're going to work through the entire draft, not copying and pasting in every single scene from your previous draft, but now and again you can copy and paste from the last one. If something was working perfectly well and fine, then you can move stuff over from the last draft as needed, but that should not be your kind of default way of dealing with it. And then you'll work all the way through it, updating your revision guide as you go and highlighting to indicate what you finished, what still needs to be changed, what needs to be cut, etc. in the successive drafts after that. And then last, you will go into your extra passes, the extra passes being an additional look through the script for any one single element at a time that you feel still needs time or attention. This could be anything from just dialogue, or just a single character's arc and trajectory, or it could be just the action scenes, or it could be just anything else. Whatever you've gotten notes on that says this all the way through the whole script needs improvement. Maybe it's voice, maybe it's brevity, maybe it's clarity. Hopefully it's not clarity, but a clarity pass is a common kind of early kind of extra pass to do. So you'll finish all the extra passes on your own, and then once you do maybe 3 or 4 of those, then you are ready to definitively mark this as the next completed draft. So that would be a numbered draft. So you go from draft 1 to draft 2. After that, you repeat the process. So you go to your next set of readers, which at that point, if you haven't done a reading yet, I recommend after draft 2, that's usually a good time to do a reading, even if it's just with your friends and family or anything else. And then once you've done your reading, you'll be able to go through this again. New notes document, new re-outline, new revision guide, and just repeat the process. Lather, rinse, repeat, as they say. And do that as many times as you need to. If you have a manager, you might be doing that up to 7 or 8 times for any individual scripts over the course of about 2 to 3 months. It's kind of miserable to rewrite the same thing over and over and over and over again. So if you're not being paid or doing this for a producer or manager, then you can stop whenever you want. At a certain point, you have to put it aside and say, you did your best, you did all you could for now, and you're going to gain more from writing something else than you would from continually reworking this same script forever and ever. So there's our just kind of the zoomed out version of all the steps. Set draft aside and move to draft 1. Feedback in notes document, re-outline, revision guide, rewrite, extra passes, and that's how you get to the next draft. So it's about 6 total significant steps. And once you've done all these, and you have updated your revision guide as you've gone through it, so you've made sure that you've addressed all the key points that you want to, maybe you have a couple things that you weren't able to totally make absolutely perfect this time, but you can mark those in the guide as well. And then when you move to the next draft, you can include those at the top of your next set of notes. And that's how you get from number to number. And this ends up being a little, although this is a lot of work, it is more definitive, and it feels more like you are making progress and moving things forward than if you just open the script and just fiddle around with it again and again. If you go in with a plan and with a checklist, and you create that sense of progress and forward momentum for yourself and everybody else involved, because you're doing this with producers and people like this, they're going to want you to walk them through and keep them on the same page for what is changing in every draft. And then they will feel like you definitively have moved it forward if you can make your little guide, mark it up, and at the end say, I finished conclusively, this is the next draft. Okay, so let's go through every step one at a time. We'll start with feedback. So if you have not yet made a feedback document or a notes document and you are working on a script right now, or you're participating in today's swap or this upcoming week's swap, just go to Google Docs, make a new document, just call it Name of Script Notes. And there you're just going to have to paste in all the feedback comments that you've gotten in writing, which you can highlight, just copy and paste into the same thing. Or if you are getting notes from someone simply over the phone or Zoom or something, or just verbally, which is a very common, I just want to point out, a very common way to get feedback from development executives. They're not going to stop and write out full comments and notes for you every time. By far, they will not do that. So a lot of the time will just be a call with you. They talk to you for 20 minutes, they tell you a bunch of thoughts, and then it's your job to write them all down. And it's your job to keep track of it all. And that's why you have to have the notes document open anytime you're receiving notes and feedback from the script, so you can make even as simple as just a list of 5 to 10 bullet points that they give you of the main key things that they're recommending that you focus on, or that they wanted to see, or questions that they had, or anything else like this. And you just want to write everything down. You're not trying to exclude anything that you think is dumb or wrong or anything else. Don't respond at all. You're just trying to write all the feedback down. So that's what this document is for, and that's where you're going to continually gather and accumulate all of the reactions, notes, thoughts, questions that anyone has over the same script. You can arrange them, but I would kind of separate them by person to begin with, but then after you get them all, then you can arrange them by biggest to smallest, or you can put them in chronological order from beginning to end of the story, whatever is easier for you. Here's a question. How many documents do you usually have per screenplay? Sketchbook, notes, document, then re-outlines. So I have never really counted, but this depends on if it's for someone or not, because if it's for someone, usually it comes with a one sheet. It comes with additional deliverables before you even write the script, and that would be 1 sheet, 3 sheet treatment, so that's going to add kind of 3 extra documents right at the start. But I guess I would say, how many documents do we have per screenplay? So we go from sketchbook to story beats to scene cards, so that's 3, and then if we're not counting the script itself, then we'll go right to re-outline, notes document, revision guide. So at least 6 per script, and then an additional probably 3 for every draft. So it's not extremely simple. It's not the way that I approach it and recommend going about it, at least. It's not just the type of writing where you just open a blank page and you're like, all right, movie time. There's a lot of steps, and there's a lot that goes into making sure you have a strong foundation to the idea that you then build upon and build upon and build upon. We are not just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and just trying stuff. You are making a concrete plan, starting at the ground level and layering on the concrete and the wood and the drywall and everything else until you have a substantial and strong structure at the end of it. So, how do we evaluate the script? And this is going to come from not only you, this is not only going to pertain to other people reading you and how they're going to evaluate your work, but this also just might give you some thoughts as to how to evaluate other people's work. And if you're looking for a more comprehensive guide to this, I would recommend the Verve Coverage Guide, which is by it's just a 20-page PDF. It's made by the Verve Management Company, and it is a sort of step-by-step list of all the major things that you'll want to evaluate in a script and questions that you will want to ask. So we start with premise and concept. Does the very basic idea work? And I guess the reason I recommend going through writing scripts in such a methodical way is to make sure that you're not 5 drafts in and you realize the concept doesn't work. if there's something flawed about the very basic idea, then this may be a page 1 rewrite as opposed to a polish. So make sure that the premise and concept are actually working. So we need to, essentially, it's not just, is this a good idea for a movie that could be entertaining? It's more like, does the writer take full advantage of the concept that they have decided to utilize? If you decide to write a movie about, I don't know, a lizard farm that rises up in a rebellion, but most of the movie is about the farmer's romantic drama with his ex-wife that doesn't even live on the reptile farm, and like 50% of the movie is just him having conversations with his ex-wife, then like, I thought this was about a lizard uprising. Like, it just doesn't feel like you're taking advantage of the premise. It feels like the premise is split between different ideas, or there's too many ideas in it, or something like that. And that is often where you're going to see people faltering on just the premise and concept. Because, like, almost anything can be an interesting movie if you play it right. But if you're not capitalizing on the most interesting parts of the idea, then you're not showing us enough of the thing that we wanted as we opened the script. Those are signs that there's something wrong with the premise or concept. Any of these kind of straight-to-streaming creature feature monster movies that are made for, like, $25 that you'll find on, like, Amazon, where it's called, like, Fish Monster or something like that, and there's the fish monsters in the movie for like 30 seconds. Those are not taking full advantage of their premise or concept. Plot and structure. So we need to make sure that the plot moments feel dramatic and interesting and like high stakes enough for the genre that they're in, and that the structure is working. We're not just kind of randomly flowing through a story where it starts at a low point and then your characters succeed at their goal by halfway, and then they're just kind of wandering loose and aimless for the rest of the story, or any of these structural problems like this. Pacing is going to be how quickly things happen. So are we spending too long on certain moments? Is it taking too long to get the story going? Or does it feel like we're sprinting through every moment and not taking enough time to allow things to settle and process? We have character and dialogue, so it might be characters that are not consistent in their voice motivations or their actions. We might have, or maybe dialogue, diction, syntax, anything else like that might be kind of off. Prose and formatting is going to come down to the words that you're using on the page in your script and just how you are presenting things, the way that you are communicating certain ideas, and that's going to largely come down to things like clarity, brevity, and voice. And last, we have genre and tone, meaning, are you creating the proper emotional experience on the page? If this is supposed to be a really serious war drama, but the characters are constantly cracking jokes like it's no big deal, and characters die and everyone moves on like it's nothing, then it's not going to really feel that dramatic. Or maybe the opposite. If you're writing what's supposed to be a comedy and we start off with a scene of a character getting hit by a bus, then it may not be that funny. And the problem, obviously a character getting hit by a bus can be kind of funny. But if you play things wrong, then the emotional experience you're creating will not match up to what you've promised or what the readers are going to go in expecting and wanting. So that's what genre and tone comes down to. Usually it comes down to emotional experience. So those are some just questions you can ask yourself, and when you're giving notes to others, focus on the work. Don't make comments about the writer themselves. We're not trying to say you suck or you are the best writer I've ever seen or anything like that. We're only talking about the work. So it's nice to find at least one thing that's working well and start with this. You don't have to always layer it as the compliment sandwich or whatever, but you just consider that it's like a lot of work to write something. It's really difficult to write something. It's kind of emotionally draining, and it's difficult to share these things too. And a lot of the time artists are people that are more sensitive or fragile in some ways, and we have to respect that by not just launching in with, all right, buddy, you messed up here. You wasted my time and you led me to, you gave me a miserable excuse for a script. Don't start like that. Someone tried hard at this and they shared it with you because they trust you. And so we can't really betray that by trying to hurt their feelings right away. So that's not to say you have to lie to them or trick them or make stuff up. That's good. But legitimately do search for something that they have done well. If there's literally nothing, then start off by saying, it's amazing that you wrote a script. Like if it's someone's very first script, just try to find something noteworthy or impressive that they have done. And then we can go into critical suggestions that you can make, and you can always be layering in more things you thought they did well. And some of the best notes, I think, are going to be ones where you say something like, on page 12, I thought you did this really well, but then later on, I would love to see you be more consistent with that or see more examples of that, because that's clearly something that they can emulate if they themselves have already done that thing well. It just makes it a little bit easier for them because they have a perfect example to draw from, and they can go back and say, okay, I need to match that tone that I already successfully, or match that moment that I already successfully created at some other point in the script. So those are usually going to be the most effective notes. If you can find those things where they faltered at something throughout, but maybe 1 or 2 times they did it well, point to those and say, make all those other moments like this, and I think that would work better. What else? Premise, story, characters, scene work. Don't really nitpick on minor details, and things like typos or grammar problems. They matter, but like, you're just not gonna get that. Like, unless someone's paying you to do a proofread, then it's not really your job to go through and fix every typo or things like that. You're looking at the bigger stuff. Do you care about the characters? Did you invest in the journey? Were you bored with the pacing? Were the scenes working? Anything like this. Who was driving the story? Ask this question too. Is the main character clearly in the driver's seat, making choices that advance their goals and get them closer to their super objective, so every scene moves them in some way closer to or further from their larger objective? Their dialogue sounds distinct for each character and reveals their personality, and they don't all feel like carbon copies or clones of the same personality type. Try setting aside your personal genre preferences and just try to consider, do your best, think, what is the audience for this movie or show? Is there an audience, and would it please fans of that genre? And to that end, you might just want to pass on reading things that you don't think you could possibly ever enjoy. If you hate war movies, and you think that it's not a fun experience to watch soldiers suffer and die, for instance, and that's a valid feeling, you don't have to enjoy that. And for me, for instance, I don't enjoy rom-coms. I've never seen one that I've liked at all. I just wouldn't volunteer to read somebody's rom-com, because I wouldn't enjoy it, and it wouldn't be their fault. And anything I pointed to would be, it's not that I haven't done coverage, I have done coverage on them before, and I'm able to sort of step back and evaluate objectively what are the fans looking for, but I just don't have as strong of a sense of what the fans want, or if it's being pulled off on the page, or if I don't like a moment just because I don't think these moments ever work, or if it's just because they haven't pulled it off particularly well for their individual script. So probably pass on doing coverage or notes on a script if you do not think you could ever enjoy that genre at all. Luke says Groundhog Day, sort of rom-com. Yeah, Groundhog Day, and also Palm Springs, which is same plot type, and also definitely a rom-com, and I loved it. So there's exceptions here and there, definitely. So let me take questions so far. Questions on how to figure out what changes to make, or how to evaluate feedback you've received. I have a little more to share on, or advice to give on feedback, but let me stop for questions before I get more into it. Feel free to either raise a hand or use the text chat if you have a question. Okay, here's a question from Michael. Can I go a bit deeper on the note between the notes? Or this is often described as the note behind the note. Sure, so note behind the note. So this is a really common idea. We should probably go into this. So note behind the note is an idea that refers to evaluating scripts and stories is a difficult task. And even people who are professionals at this aren't always perfect at articulating exactly what they mean or exactly what they're feeling in any given note. A note is an attempt to address a problem, or an attempt to correct something that they feel is missing or is not there, but it's not always perfectly articulated, and because people interpret things in so many different ways. Sometimes somebody might be saying something or giving you a note that sounds pretty prescriptive, like you should do this. And then you do that, and they're like, no, that didn't fix the problem. And that may be because what they were really getting at by attempting to give you that note was some other problem that they maybe couldn't as clearly express to you, or that maybe that either they don't have the analysis skills to break down and articulate, or it could be that it's just something that's kind of hard to pin down. It might just be something that's a little bit elusive or slippery, that it's just hard to fully explain what they mean. Or it might be that they're getting a feeling and they don't know exactly what is causing it. They're trying their best to identify and to tell you what the solution will be, but the note behind the note is kind of like the real thing that they're getting at. So if someone says something like, you should get rid of the mom character, And then you do get rid of the mom character, and maybe they're like, something's still off. It might be because at the beginning of your script, there's a really long conversation with the mom that feels really boring. And what the note behind the note is, your movie's taking too long to get going. The mom character is just what's standing in the way of that. And they may not have, like, fully grasped that. They may not have identified that, or they may just not have explained that properly, or maybe you just didn't get that from what they were saying. But so that's what you kind of have to ascertain, is you have to always be asking, why are they giving this, like, what is giving them this feeling? Or what is making them feel as if this is the only solution to that thing? And then it's not always the only solution. The notes are just suggestions. So if you and if you can successfully address the note behind the note without doing the thing the person said, they usually won't care. And not only that, they'll be like, oh my god, you just fixed it. Like, what they were telling you to do wasn't like, you have to do this or I won't be happy. What they were telling you to do was, what they were doing was telling you something felt off to me, and this is my best guess as to what it was or to how to fix it. I hope that answers that. So you have to always have that in mind. Like, who is the one evaluating? You have to ask, what is their skill level? What is their English fluency? What are any of these other things that might be affecting how they're able to express the notes to me? And it's not to say that we're disregarding the notes, but that we're looking for what feeling are they actually attempting to address by giving these, and then we have to kind of beat them to the punch and look for maybe sometimes other ways to address those notes. It's always up to you at the end of the day. Like, there's no one that's going to stand over your shoulder and make sure that it's not like a school assignment where you have to go through a checklist of everything they give you. If you fix the problem and you don't address any of their notes at all, they won't even remember that they gave you those notes in the first place. They're not like looking at a checklist to see if everything got fixed with every draft. Hope that helps. Question from H something. If you receive feedback that says something you should get rid of, but you have reasons for keeping it, how should you handle it? Okay. So for notes that are seeming to change the story in a way that you don't feel as if would be helpful for the story, it's always up to you. You can always do whatever you want, unless you're working for a producer or manager and they won't take your script out unless you make the change, in which case you do kind of have to do what they say. But if it's just a script for yourself, it's a spec you've written on your own and you're just working with notes that people have given you, that you're asking for their best opinions on how to make this the best story it can be, then sometimes you're going to get stuff you disagree with. Yeah, definitely. I would stick to your guns until you start getting the same note from multiple people. And if you get the same thing from more than one person, it's a red flag. If you get it from more than two people, then you're in the wrong. I hope that makes sense. Unless it's there are exceptions to everything, of course. But if you're getting the same note from three separate readers that have not conferred with each other, because you sometimes have this problem of one person in the feedback session says, you sure used the word purple a lot, and then everyone else starts going, oh yeah, you sure said purple a lot. Like, that can kind of get everyone on the same page in a way they may not necessarily have been otherwise. But if you have three separate readers that, with no knowledge of each other, have all touched on the same issue, that's something you should probably change. Like, at a certain point, the data set just gets big enough that you are starting to assess what an audience would actually think of this. And at the end of the day, you're writing for, I don't know if you're writing for yourself or writing for the audience. Everyone has a different answer to that. But the audience is pretty important, and we want them to be happy and feel like they got their money's worth, I think, is a pretty universal way of approaching this. Here's a question. What if three separate readers are all making a common mistake? Readers making a mistake? What mistake can readers make? I guess the only mistake that readers would make is if they were missing something that was really clear and obvious in the text. But if three people have missed it, it's probably not that clear and obvious, I guess. It would be like if you had three readers that were on their phone browsing TikTok the entire time, would be pretty much the only way that readers could make a mistake. But it's sort of like the customer is always right. Like, we can't really go into it assuming the reader didn't really pay attention, or, unless they get all the characters' names wrong and they're like, I hated the spaceship, and you're like, it's not a sci-fi movie, there was no spaceship, what are you talking about? Like, those are the only times I would really say the readers are, it's, what is that Simpsons meme? Is it me who's wrong? No, it's the children that are wrong. Rarely can we actually lean on that. Maybe Luke has a clarification. Go ahead.
So let's say you're writing historical fiction and you get a note about, like, hey, this one little thing, like, didn't feel historical or part of the setting. Like, I think you should do it like blah, blah, blah that I'm familiar with, when really it was historically done the other way. Like, common mistakes with like facts, just stuff that's like factually you can demonstrate, like I don't know, history, things like that.
Well, the note in that case was it didn't feel authentic to me.
Sure.
And in that sense, they were not wrong. They weren't incorrect. They weren't making a mistake. It didn't feel authentic to them. They meant that. And so you can do one of two things. You can ignore that because there will just be some audience members that are not as familiar with your setting or time period or whatever else, and we just know that. And in the course of a feature film, you can usually accept that viewers will be a little less nitpicky than readers will be. Or you can change it in such a way that you don't subvert the historicity of something, but you do change it to something that doesn't feel like it threw that person off. Like the Tiffany problem, where Tiffany was a medieval name, but when you read a character named Tiffany in a medieval book, it feels sort of weird, right?
Sure.
So that might be okay. We just change her name from Tiffany to another applicable, relevant medieval name. And it might turn out that if you are running into that problem of a lot of readers are bumping on something that you're like, no, it is historical, like guys don't get it, you might just want to take the sidestep and choose something a little bit something else that also works. Would just usually be my recommendation.
I mean, this just bumps into the question that I keep running into of like how to make things realistic without making them absurd.
Yeah.
When reality is, I feel like historical fiction is so watered down with its like facts and details because of that, because of what audiences are willing to accept.
This is why, it's a hard genre to crack. I mean, they sometimes take things out of movies because the audiences don't buy it. Like in the script for Gladiator, where they had billboards with gladiators on them advertising products. That was real. They really did that. But they took it out of the movie because audiences were like, what? No. That feels like it's out of Shrek.
Yeah.
If you see it out of context or not knowing. So your job as an entertainer of historical fiction is not necessarily to inform and to meticulously deliver a portrait of a heavily researched time and place. That's kind of like nonfiction. That's really the job of that genre. It's not always your job to present a perfect picture. It's to entertain the audience and do your best, but you have to make concessions here and there, and you have to make changes here and there. And if you're losing readers, you're losing readers. Like there's just like we have one job. It's to entertain the reader as much as we can. So I realize that is like a couple different answers for you. You have to just kind of play it by ear sometimes and figure out what works for you. But at the end of the day, if they're bumping on something, they're not wrong for getting that feeling.
I just wish the genre as a whole could kind of progress a little more rapidly with what audiences are willing to accept.
That would be cool. I agree.
Anyway, thanks for the help.
Sure. Thanks for the questions. Let's see. Megan says, facts are facts. Just keep it as long as it's not the person paying you. Yeah, as if it's the person paying you, then it's really up to them. And after 7, even if they're not paying you, if it's a manager that you're doing rewrites with, it's up to them to take the script out. They're not going to take it out until they're happy with it. And after 7 drafts, you will not care anymore. I guarantee you. You'll be like, okay, I'll change that. Okay, sure. It's not even mine anymore. Go ahead. You don't really feel that much ownership after having done 8 drafts of something from other people's notes. Okay, let's go into reoutline. So reoutline is going to look just like your first outline, but it's going to be one that reflects your current draft of the script. So that's going to be like a set of scene cards. I'll show you my scene cards here for my most recent script. So each one is going to include a couple things. One, we have a name for the scene. We have the page numbers that it takes place on, which should be even easier now that you have the full script in front of you. You have what happens in the scene and maybe a couple lines of dialogue here and there if you want to, but you don't have to write out all the dialogue. And then you can include structural headings too if that is helpful for you. So for instance, you can see we start with intro, we move to catalyst, trying the locks, break into 2, premise scenes, midpoints, escalation, all is lost, pit of despair, break into 3, etc. I recommend using the document outline feature, which you can see here. So in Google Docs, if you click View, Show Document Outline, then you can bring this up on the left-hand side of your page and use the headings to designate how things should be organized. Really helpful to get a picture of the story like that in your re-outline if you haven't done so already. So, You are making a version of this outline that reflects the script that you have. Even if the scenes are flawed or not working or anything else, you can write out a scene card that's just like, they talk about nothing for a while and it's really boring. If that's like what the scene ended up being, then you can write that in your re-outline, because you're not trying to fix anything right now. You're just trying to show us a zoomed out version of the script as you have it, which means that you can write these scene cards as just a sentence if you are only doing this for yourself. If you're collaborating with other people on this and they need to be able to keep the story straight between different drafts, then you need to put a little more work into the scene cards to make them more readable. So take 4 or 5 sentences probably with each one and add a little more detail, make sure that all the sentences connect. You're not using placeholder or shorthand too much, and in any case you are just making it so that other people would be able to follow along. So this is the re-outline, which was our second step. Remember, first step was feedback and notes, so I guess that was 2. We had feedback and notes, then we moved to re-outline. Then our next step is your revision guide, which starts with you making a copy of the re-outline. So you click File, you go to Make a Copy, and then you can come up with a new name for it. You'd probably just call it Revision Guide. And you're doing this, you're making the copy so that you have the full version of the re-outline saved and completely clean and not marked up. So you're going to use the outline, and then you'll have your notes document open in another tab, and you're going to go through one at a time, and you're going to move the notes into the re-outline in the places where they would probably go. And we're going to use color coding to keep everything straight. So I'm just going to pretend this is one of my notes. I'm going to say maybe this was something that affected the catalyst. So let's go to the catalyst scene. I'm going to add this note to the end of the catalyst. So this would be like, here's all the stuff that I want to change. I'm going to mark it yellow. And maybe some parts of the scene are already working, so you can mark those green. Maybe that's green. Maybe I want to cut that part. That would be red. And then the rest of it would be things that need to be changed or that need attention still. So that's how we're using the color coding in the stoplight system, as I call it. So you're moving in the notes to the relevant places, and if anything, as you're color coding your re-outline, you can, if a scene is totally fine, you can just mark it all green. Maybe it's working perfectly, you got no notes on it, you want to keep it exactly as it was before, and just mark it all green. The goal is for the entire thing to be green by the end, but maybe there are things along the way that you need to change. Let's consider moving this into yellow instead, and you can always adjust the text as well. So let's see this family dinner scene. The Foster family makes dinner together. What if we wanted to change that to lunch instead? You could move it all green, except for keep the word, obviously lunch would be the yellow part, because that's what needs to change about that scene. Or you could spell it out a little bit more. Make this lunch instead. Is this clear how we can add notes to the re-outline in order to create the revision guide? The goal is you go through the entire thing like this, you mark up the whole guide, dragging in all of the notes, so you're copying and pasting in notes from your notes document, moving them wherever they go in the story, and then by the end, you're going to be able to just start at page 1. You open up a brand new script document, and copying and pasting in previous pages as needed. You will then work through your entire rewrite, making the changes that you have addressed, and marking up the revision guide as you go. So as you finish a scene, if everything's perfect, you mark the whole thing green. If some parts didn't turn out that right, or they need to still be changed, you'll keep some parts yellow. And if you want to cut something, you would mark it red. But then when you get to that point in the script, I actually recommend deleting it rather than keeping it red. But you can keep it red if you need to remember what was cut for some reason. Okay, questions on the process of making the revision guides? Question in the chat from Luke. I'm curious what the images in your outline are for. So I have images in my sketchbook. It's because this is we go right from sketchbook into an early version of my scene cards. Then to be clear, sometimes I do just make a completely new blank a new clean document for just the cards. But up here I had Sketchbook as well, and in the Sketchbook I included like a sort of cover image just to sort of set the tone. And also it was one of the first images you see in the script, so I wanted to have this in mind, what this would look like, and be able to describe this well. Then we have images as well to sort of help me get into the mood, describe the atmosphere properly, see what some of the costumes would look like on the characters, and also I have a map of the property, considering this is a contained horror movie. That all takes place on an apple orchard. I needed a sense of how far apart different things are on the apple orchard. Question in chat, what is a sketchbook? Okay, so the very first step in the writing process that I teach and use personally is to make a sort of blank document like this behind me that is just going to serve as a depository for all of your ideas, research, and kind of unsorted concepts for this movie before you start organizing it into an outline. So it's all the pre-writing work you do before you start assembling story beats, scene cards, and more concrete story details. So it's like a collage where you put down all of your influences, inspirations, and any snippets of ideas you have for characters, dialogue, scenes, rules of the world, the villains, the protagonist, the relationships, and anything else. So there's no real rules to what goes into a sketchbook, but it's kind of to collect all of your ideas in one place. Question from Luke, do I keep a copy of each re-outline? No. Or I actually think I do, but I never go back to them for the most part, unless I'm doing a rewrite with other people. I kind of don't often look back personally at previous re-outlines, but you might. It's okay if you do. But in this kind of cloud-based writing world, you never really need to delete anything. Question, why do we call it a sketchbook instead of something like a Bible? Because a Bible is like a comprehensive final document, where a sketchbook is more like a place to keep a bunch of unsorted ideas, some of which you might use, some of which you don't. Whereas a Bible gives the connotation that it's a comprehensive text that tells you everything you need to know about something. A sketchbook is a little bit more exploratory than that. You're trying stuff out. You're putting in stuff that may be there, may not be there. You're putting down all kinds of stuff. There's no things not to include in a sketchbook, whereas there's lots of things you wouldn't include in a Bible. Question from Luke, do you delete the note as you insert and highlight changes to make? No, so I would not delete them unless they are marked as red. If they're marked as red, then that means something that needs to just be cut from the story, and reading through this document will still make sense, or it should still make sense if you cut that out. Whereas if you make a change, and that's still how the scene goes, like we changed that dinner scene to lunch earlier, I would mark it green, but keep the text itself there. Any other questions? All right, if there's no more questions, we'll continue. So I've gone from, where did we start? We started with feedback and notes document, re-outline, revision guide. Now we're moving ahead to simply rewrite. So I already went through stoplight system. So the rewrite, we're starting at page 1, completely new blank page, which might feel intimidating. Oh, how can I ever fill up all these pages? But you've done it before, so you can do it again. You're going to open your old script in a separate window, or it's helpful if you export it to whatever format is easier for copying and pasting text, which would not be a PDF. HTML is usually the easiest format, which most screenwriting software can export as. TXT files can also work for this. And then you have that open in your other tab or your other window, and starting with page 1, you can copy and paste in individual lines or scenes from your previous draft as necessary, but don't make that your default. You're not always going to do that. You want to leave a little room for yourself to make new sort of connective tissue between scenes, add new lines or new moments or new clarification or new anything else. You don't want to feel locked into how things were in the last draft. And as you go through, you're going to update your revision guide with color coding to reflect your progress and process on the new draft, so marking things green as they're finished, yellow if they still need review or you still have something you need to go back to and review about that, or red if you plan on cutting it. And then we are going to finish this draft with no red or yellow left on the entire thing. So ideally it's all going to be marked green by the end. Extra passes. So the extra passes might be for any number of individual script elements, things that we would see in a coverage guide. This would be stuff like just dialogue, just characters, or maybe just a specific character. It's pretty common to see, especially if you have a lot of characters, passes for one character at a time to make sure that their story has a clear 3-act trajectory to it, that their motivations make sense, that their actions make sense, that their dialogue remains consistent throughout, that their quirks and personality remain the same. We have prose and formatting, so that's going to be just what you're writing on the page itself, the way that you are writing and presenting scenes, clarity, brevity, and voice. And last, we have tone, which is essentially going to, again, be the emotional feeling that your script is creating. If it is a comedy, but it's feeling really scary, or it's a horror movie, but it's feeling really funny, something is off, and you might need to go back and adjust lines of dialogue, the way that you're describing things, the way that your characters are acting, behaving, or saying things, or anything else in these individual extra passes for just focusing on one element at a time. How do we know when it's done? There's not really one definitive answer to this question. Some people say scripts are never really done. They're just kind of abandoned. You can stop when you think you've addressed every note and you've made it as good as you can. You send it out to get another read and then keep doing that until you can't stand it anymore, or until people come back and say, this was perfect, no notes. But that's like kind of the rarest note you'll ever see is, no notes, this was perfect. You will pretty much never see that. Normally it's going to be about 3 to 5 drafts until you get to the point where you've done the hard work, you've done as much as you can, and now to continue reworking it would be to over-knead the dough or whatever, and to stop actually improving it. I would say don't do more than 5 drafts unless you're being paid. If you're doing more than that and you're not being paid, then move on to a new project, set this one aside, and come back to it later when you have developed your skills more and you are able to look at it with more distance and perspective. Even pro screenwriters have difficulty determining when a project is ready to be sent out, so this is a common concern to have. Okay, let's hear questions on the whole rewrite process. If anyone's not clear what to do next, or how to go about approaching their rewrite, I'll take questions on that now. And then when we're done with that, I will open the floor to anyone that wants help on their thing that they are rewriting. So that would be even things like story logic, continuity, plot holes, anything you're still trying to fix in your script. So let's start with questions. Anyone unclear on any part of the rewrite? Looks like we have a few folks typing. I'll let you guys finish your questions there. Thank you, Dan. Okay, first question. How do I avoid remaking it scene for scene with some rewordings here or there? So a couple things. One, if you're getting enough notes and if you're getting enough feedback, usually it won't really feel like you're just rewriting the exact same scripts. If you're addressing all the problems, usually you're going to be making changes all throughout. And another helpful thing is just the whole starting at the completely blank page kind of element, as opposed to opening up a previous draft and just editing stuff. So I would often recommend doing that and start with the blank page and move things over here and there as needed. But for the most part, you are writing new scenes. And I think that also something what have I not gotten to? I think I've covered pretty much all my techniques for re-outlining. You will definitely have to, in the re-outline process, assess that you are meeting all the goals and assess that you are actually addressing all of the notes. If it feels like you've done all you can do and the notes that you're getting are not changing the story that much, then you may have already addressed them. Yeah, this doesn't happen that much, though, I would say. I've not seen this concern happen all that often. As in, if any scene is a remake of another, did I even do the right job and actually rewrite it, in other words? No, if a scene is working fine, it's working fine. And if you got no notes at all on a certain scene, and if you're happy with it, if you think it's entertaining and amusing, just keep it. There's no problem with that. You can always do that. Sometimes you nail it the first time. Not every time, but sometimes you do nail it the first time. And there's not a problem with a scene turning out the same as it did in the first draft. Particularly if you're getting notes that are like, I love that part, then yeah, you should keep it the same way as it was already. So yeah, if it's working, nothing wrong with that. If it's not working, then you should change it enough that it doesn't feel substantially the same, I guess. I hope that answered that. Feel free, if I didn't answer it or you want to clarify, feel free to raise a hand and say so. We have another question. Do you have to rewrite the whole thing? And if so, how do you get in the mindset, for me at least? Do you have to rewrite the whole thing? Well, it depends on your objective here. You never have to rewrite anything. I mean, you don't have to write it all. Do you have to rewrite the whole thing? If you are being paid for it, then I would say yes. If you're not being paid for it, you can rewrite any elements of it that you want. But I still do recommend starting with page 1, or starting at a blank page, new document, rather than opening the previous draft and adjusting things. So, and by opening that brand new blank document, it will sort of feel like you're rewriting the whole thing, regardless of how much you're actually changing. So I would say it's variable, and it depends on what your objectives are and what your actual goal here, or what your paid job is in theory. If you're rewriting for yourself on your own, then you make your own objectives. But usually, yeah, you're rewriting the whole thing. Other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, then we will move ahead to simply story rewrite problems. Anything that I can answer or help with. I'm not going to go more than probably 15 minutes with each person, but if you have a question or problem that can be resolved in about that amount of time, now's free open season to ask. So feel free to paste in the chat if you have something that you want us to look at, or you can simply raise a hand and ask if you think you can just talk it through. What have you guys got? Michael, go ahead.
So I feel like I've written myself into a corner. A big note that I've been getting is that my TV pilot is the pace is too slow. On the other hand, I feel like I've manufactured it in a way where it has a bit of a sort of slow burn to it that ramps up as we get towards the end. And at the same time, some of the notes, the positive notes that I've gotten, are for scenes that could actually be cut. So I'm in a really weird place where it's I feel like if I fix something, then something else is gonna become worse, and vice versa, essentially.
Okay. What genre is your script?
It's a crime drama.
Crime drama. Okay. And when people say they feel like it takes a while to get going, does that mean it takes a while for the crime to happen, or what are they specifically referring to? Is there some kind of main action that takes a while to actually start happening?
Yes, exactly. The crime definitely does take a while to ramp up, but I've designed it so that the character is very reluctant to essentially start committing crimes, and basically he's trying to get his life together until he can't any longer, and he has to resort to crime.
Okay, so it sounds to me like the opening act or two might just, your readers are bumping off of the fact that they are just not compelled enough by those scenes, or they don't feel that they are grabbing their attention and interest early on, perhaps. And that can be addressed in a couple ways. I think that it would be a little easier if I knew what the actual story was, but I will say that you can, in any genre, you can make this sort of this is the problem. It's how do you hook people into a horror movie when the monster doesn't show up till halfway, right? Well, you have to make the other stuff just as good or better, right? So much so that we kind of forget that there's going to be a monster. And so to that end, I guess I would say, does your character have compelling, interesting conflicts with a strong sense of progress before the crime happens?
Um, yeah, yes and no. I think. Yeah, I could definitely do better in that department, I think.
Okay, and
It's
it might
definitely
come down to
components,
that idea of progress is often going to be where readers feel like we're not being engaged, and it can be tough to think of, well, what's the progress? He's trying to not do a crime, right? And to that end, you might have to find some way or some mechanism of creating that sense of progress. Even if it's as simple as something like, I don't know if I'm going to come up with something good just off the top of my head, not knowing the sort of setting or world of your story. But your character, if they feel like they are making clear, tangible progress towards something, then that's usually going to be the best way to keep people engaged. You might just have to come up with an objective for your character early on that feels like they can accomplish that in the first act, or that's something that maybe they could reasonably accomplish even in the first act, like by the end of the first act maybe. And so it could come down to you just needing to give the character sort of smaller incremental goals as they work towards the sort of centerpiece of the episode.
Gotcha.
But not knowing the story, maybe that doesn't sound right, maybe that doesn't sound relevant. Does that seem like that might help in any way, just sort of giving your character more concrete, urgent things to do in the first act or two?
Yeah.
Okay, I hope that helps then. I mean, feel free to ask more if you want to while we have you, but that's what I would look into doing. And it can be tough, especially when your main character is like, I don't want to be involved in the exciting things that are happening, which it sounds like is the case for you. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's because it's like anyone's life, right? Or like anyone in real life does not actually want to be involved in crime for the most part. And so the tricky part is making characters trying to do something unexciting actually interesting. And that means that they have to go about trying to stop the exciting things from happening in an interesting way. It's weird to kind of lay it out like that. But like, I can only give you an example of a way I did this before. I didn't like get this movie made or anything, so it's not like it was a smashing success. But I just had the same story problem of, this is a movie about a samurai that lives in a small town in the Old West, and he's trying to have a quiet life. And somebody shows up and is like, hey, I remember you from my past. You did me wrong, and now I want to fight you. And now the main character is like, well, I don't want to fight. I have a life here. How do I make that interesting, right? So I had to kind of add in these tangible, concrete objectives in for the first half of the script, where it's like, what does he want to do? He wants to not fight. How do you actively pursue not fighting? Well, I have to gather allies in the town to get people on my side. And that sort of became the main action of the first half of the movie. Social encounters where he needs to get this person on his side. And that way we actually do have a concrete sense of progress, because we get the idea that if he gets the whole town on his side, no one's going to make him fight, right? So, or they're going to support him in not fighting it, or kick the other guy out, or anything else. So you need to come up with an active way to get an active and interesting way for your character to avoid getting involved in the crime thing.
Yeah, actually, that does help. I can definitely push that a bit further. So, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for the question. Very, very good question. How do you make characters doing uninteresting things interesting? Definitely doesn't get asked enough.
Also, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Here's some more questions in the chat, it looks like. You said to write a certain number of completed scripts per year. Does anybody else worry when behind quota? I wouldn't worry, personally. You can get as much done as you can get done. If you're doing your best, you're doing as many scripts as you can. There's not like a Mr. Hollywood who's going to be like, you're fired from Hollywood. It's like, no, you're just practicing and improving. So I wouldn't worry way too much about it. Luke says, I worry I'm chronically under quota, but I'm writing more and managing time better. Well, that's great. That's all you can do, really. Question from H something. How do you have the character do things instead of the interesting things happen to them, the protagonist? Okay, how do you keep your main character active? Well, you need to look at whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, then just simply ask yourself, what would be the incremental steps towards accomplishing that thing? And then ask what would be the challenges and obstacles that would get in the way of them accomplishing that thing. So if your characters, we were just talking about, for instance, your characters trying to just get their life back to normal, well, there's lots of active steps that you would have to take to do that, depending on what's disrupting the normal thing, right? So you want to keep your character active instead of passive or reactive as much as you can. Sometimes there are moments where they have to have a scene where something just happens to your character that they did not cause or put into motion in any way. Usually it's going to be early on in the movie. And that might be your catalyst, for instance. If your catalyst is your character gets attacked by a werewolf, they didn't cause that to happen. They didn't put that in motion. It's not their fault, anything else. But now that has happened, your character is forced to react and is forced to become active in order to, I don't know, find a cure for being a werewolf, or find a way to find the werewolf that created you, or anything else. So I think it's going to just simply come down to always ask yourself, what are the steps that would be required to achieve this goal? What would be in the way? And what would be the most interesting way that my character could go about attempting to tackle those steps, given the resources and skills and relationships that they have? And for instance, you might, in some genres like slasher, right? You might be like, how can slasher characters be active? All they're doing is getting murdered, then running away. Well, give them plans. They have to come up with objectives and plans on their own. Your main character's like, we need to get to the phone in the barn in order to call the police. That's a plan. That's being active. It's only they only have to do that as a result of something that did happen to them. But the whole movie isn't them being like, okay, now we're in the barn. Now we just wait. Oh no, somebody else died. Now we're in the house. Now we just wait. Oh no, somebody else just died. Give your character agency. Make sure that they're able to make plans with other characters and to put them in motion in order to attempt to achieve those objectives and tackle whatever obstacles happen along the way. They don't have to succeed. They can fail every stage of the way and still remain active characters. Hope that helps. Thank you for the question. We have plenty of time left for any and all story problems, questions, rewrite issues. You can share an outline if you want. Not sure, go ahead. Not sure, did you intend to request it? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have any tips or suggestions for, like, you know, just in terms of like timing. Like, so let's say if I was, you know, I like, if for anyone who may be planning to do their rewrite, maybe this is their first draft and it's going to have a bigger, you know, more heavy lifting, like how to sort of divide up the work. And let's say if they're trying to do this during the course of a boot camp, like 8 weeks or something.
Sure. This is a good question, and not something we've ever really gone into. Like, how should you go about pacing yourself as you move through a rewrite? So much of what we're doing is first drafts, and a first draft, I typically try to write 5 pages a day, for instance, and until it's done. 5 pages a day. You don't always get it. I don't always make exactly 5 pages, but as long as you're getting some pages done per day, then you will be done in less than 90 days for a 90-page script, right? So for rewrites, it's a little different. It's hard to quantify exactly like a number of pages per day that you should be working through. I guess if you make your revision guide and you have all the little bullet points for all the different notes that you want to address, I would say try to get to a couple of them per day, 2 or 3 per day if you at the minimum, and maybe up to 5-ish notes per day. So I would take this by notes addressed. I guess it's really the best metric we have. There's not much else you can use besides just set a timer and I'm going to work for 2 hours and address as many notes as I can. I would try to set your objectives and pace yourself by the notes themselves. So say, for instance, I'm going to fix all this character's dialogue, and that's 1 note, and then I'll do one other thing. I'll, fix this logic problem halfway through the story. That might be all you get done for that day. I call it green on the page, is where I'm just like, my goal right now is just get green on, GOTP, whatever, green on the page. If I am marking things from yellow to green, then I am making progress, and as long as you spend a day putting more green on the page than there was at the beginning, then you are moving forward. I wouldn't try to too carefully micromanage how you are moving through a rewrite, though, unless you are being paid, in which case you probably have 8 weeks.
Yeah, like, so let's say if you're hired to do a rewrite, and like you mentioned before, you worked on a project that had like a whole bunch of different writers before, and there's all this, maybe it's like, extremely complex, but just in general, if you had 8 weeks, like how much time would you suggest to spend on just like sort of making the re-outline and making the revision guide, that those kind of steps?
Oh, sure. So is this assuming you have no other things going on in your life? So you have nothing to do but that? Because that's always...
Let's say, assuming you do have other stuff you have to do too, yeah.
Okay.
Or let's say you have 8 weeks or whatever, yeah.
Okay, you have 8 weeks, but you also have a day job and other things going on. Okay, in that case, then I would give yourself a week to do all these pre-writing documents. So a full week to do re-outline and revision guide, and then and maybe a couple days into the second week if your revision guide is like really detailed. But by the end of week 2, for sure, you should have all the preparation done, and I would get started by 2 weeks. And then from weeks 2 to 8, I guess you're working through it incrementally. Everyone does this differently. I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to turn in the whole thing at the end date. You're not turning in like half done. You're not giving them progress reports, really. For the most part, you're not giving them, here's half my pages, here's 75% of my pages, here's 100%. You just turn in the whole thing at the end. So you do have to kind of figure out what is your own process and like what days do you have the most spare time to work on it and stuff like that. But I guess the best I could give you here is try to get everything prepped and all your ducks in a row to start the pages on the rewrite by the end of the second week.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. Here's a question. Can you have more than one catalyst or many to get them to their goal, but they are still working to get to the goal? The main reason I ask is because the goal is impossible, otherwise a event happens. You mean otherwise unless an event happens? Or impossible unless an event happens? I'm not exactly sure what the last part meant there, but can you have more than one catalyst? No. So unless your story is like a TV show with multiple seasons might have kind of like a different catalyst per season, perhaps. Like if you watch, especially anthological shows like Fargo on FX or things like this, every season does have its own catalyst, for sure. But in a movie, in a single 3-act story, there can't really be more than one catalyst because there can't be more than one first domino. There can't be more than one first page. If you put another domino before the first domino, then that becomes the new first domino. We're looking for a catalyst as one event that sets the story in motion. And so to that end, you normally cannot have more than one. If something else comes later, then I would then fold that into either you're trying the lock sequence or maybe that's your break into 2. You can obviously have multiple big events in your story, but in terms of what is the thing that gets the story started, you're limited to just one. You may have little subplots, though, that have sort of smaller catalysts of their own. Thank you for the question. Floor is still open for any and all questions and rewrite stuff that you want to do. If you have a rewrite that you're working on and aren't sure how to fix some problem, or you have some story issue, you can work it out or ask those questions now if you want. Looks like we have some folks typing, and I'll also check the stream people chats. So if you're watching on a different site like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, you can also leave comments, and we usually can see them, but it often takes an extra couple minutes for it to show up. Here's a question from Luke. Advice for cutting characters that may have done important things in the script. That may have done? What do you mean they may have done important things?
Let's say you have like a bunch of characters doing a bunch of things and they all kind of feed into the main goal, and you want to cut some of these characters. Do you just give the things they did to the others, basically? Do you... Okay.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, if there are things that absolutely have to happen, then just give them to somebody else. Or you might just need to reduce the complexity of the tasks that your characters are doing, so they just require fewer steps. But those are basically your two options.
All right. Well, that seems pretty self-explanatory then. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Usually combining, or we sometimes just say you combine the characters as a whole. So that might be in terms of their personalities. If you have like 2 different characters that are both the tough one, then it's like, okay, why don't they just be the same person? And then you can also do that in terms of their tasks, goals, or objectives as well. So if you have one character that is in your heist crew because they're the safecracker, and you also need a hacker, well, maybe they could be the same person, and you could just give a more substantial role to one of the actors. It usually is a good way to go.
All right, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Question from Justin. How many flashbacks should you have leading to your intro scene, like a Deadpool starting a certain point but giving backstory throughout the story? How many flashbacks should you have leading to your intro scene? Okay, couple things. First of all, when you open a movie with a scene it's not a flashback. We're not flashing back from anything. A flashback means that the story has been going in one timeline and now we are going to reset, or we're going to look back from that timeline. If you start the movie with a scene, that's just the opening scene. It's not a flashback. Second of all, there's not one number of flashbacks or anything else that you prescriptively need to have in any story. I would say to try to lean away from these as much as you can and to not use them unless that's absolutely the only way or the very best way to illustrate that moment, because oftentimes newer writers will kind of lean on flashbacks as like a band-aid to patch exposition problems. So if you can write the story with 0 flashbacks, you should. And a lot of very, very successful specs go out with no flashbacks at all. If it turns out you need some here and there, or the whole structure of your story is dependent on them, for instance, you have multiple timelines or characters that exist in different worlds or different time frames or something like that, then it may be necessary, but I would definitely outline those very carefully and try to solve all the logic or paradox problems or anything like that at the outline stage rather than waiting until you're at the writing stage. But I wouldn't say there's any number that you need to specifically have. Just try not to use too many of them. Question from Michelle. Is this being recorded? Yep, this is live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and all of our social media, so you can find this back right after the recording is done. Question, how do you go about writing something like Oppenheimer, where you have different timelines from the same person's life revolving around the same big event? So it's really tricky to write scripts with a lot of different intertwining timelines. There's different ways that I've seen it done on the page. In Little Women by Greta Gerwig, this is like 2016 or 17, I think, is when that one came out. She actually uses different colors or like bold text, I think, in some parts of the script to indicate the different timelines. So some scenes are just written in red. You can't always do that, or you shouldn't. You don't always need to do that, but that's just one technique that I have seen to keep those different timelines separate. If you're not going to do that, you might want to find some other way of indicating to the reader really clearly when we've shifted from one timeline into another. That would usually be a really big bolded slug line. If you're not bolding all your slug lines, that one probably should be bold. Maybe even write it in a different font or slightly larger font or something like that, just to make sure the reader's eye cannot possibly miss it. And that sort of calibrates them to understand the next scene is taking place in a completely different time frame, world, anything else. So yeah, it's tough to pull off, but you'll have to find these sort of visual tricks in order to differentiate the different sections for the reader and make sure that they don't get confused. And anytime we do transition from one timeline to another, it's helpful sometimes if you give us a line of action text at the beginning that catches us up on where we are. You don't just start with like exterior boat day, she sails across the water. You start with like exterior boat, this is the boat we saw in scene 2. You kind of like place us chronologically. You tell us like, oh, we're back to his childhood, something like that, like little notes here and there that sort of help us guide us through the story, become really useful if you have a lot of moving around in time. And similarly, if you have a really big cast, if it's been a while since we've seen someone and we only saw their name once many pages ago, it's helpful if you include a note that reminds us who they are. I've seen that in ensemble scripts too. Okay, here's a question. Can you put text on screen that shows this is one timeline, this is another? Oh yeah, you can do that. It's called a super, right? All capital super, and then you simply write the text after that. I have seen that done sometimes, but then and it's usually best though if you only do that once at the beginning, like Dunkirk style, where you tell us not only where we are but when we are as well. So it'll be like, the shore of France 3 days before the attack or whatever, right? So it's helpful if you do that at the beginning. But then from that point on, every time you switch, it can be a little annoying if the text comes up every single time. So you should find some other kind of key way of indicating where we are in time, and that might be if we have the same character that is in all of these different timelines, start on them. So we cut to now he's this age again, and there's no ambiguity about where we are in the story world because he's a kid in this timeline. We understand that. So it can be helpful to have a character that kind of grounds us and that we can come back to each time. If you don't have that, then you may have to just figure out some other device for very quickly indicating to the reader which timeline are we in. it can be tough. This is very advanced techniques here. Here's a question. What if a story has an event that leads into the bigger story but feels unwarranted or underserved? What is one way to make this event more undeserved? What is a way to make the event more deserved? What if a story has an event that leads into the bigger story but feels unwarranted? Maybe you can clarify exactly what you mean by feels unwarranted. Like it seems like that event did not need to happen to lead to the other thing happening, or you're saying that maybe the word that we could use instead would be something like unearned. Is that what you're sort of saying? You feel like the audience does not feel like they earned that moment correctly? A thing just happens, yes. Okay. So you might need to show the cause of that, or a little bit earlier on, you might need to put in motion the first few steps of that thing happening. So if this is going to be, aliens invade on page 50, on page 5, we might want to have your characters look up and be like, oh, that's weird. There's kind of a light in the sky. No, it's probably nothing. And then on page 25, you have, oh, the cow went missing last night. That's strange. So then you put little clues that the reader will then be able to assemble together, that by the time they get to that thing happening later, they won't be as surprised by it because they've sort of seen the foreshadowing in place. So it sounds like what you need to do is either foreshadow or place the causes of the events earlier on in the story so that they don't feel surprising or out of nowhere by the time that they unfold. Hope that helps. If there's more that you want to ask, feel free to expand on that. All right, floor is back open. Questions, problems, rewrite issues. They can be specific to your story right now. We're trying to get you on track to ideally be getting feedback, maybe today in the swap, or maybe in any of our upcoming swaps, so that you're ready to jump into feature or TV bootcamps, which start on the 17th and 19th. So now's a great time to fix those problems, get the feedback, or answer those questions now. Question from Michelle, what did I miss? I'm not sure. You can watch back the recording if you want to. This has been an overview of rewrite process. Any other questions, problems, story issues? How do we write exposition into dialogue? Okay, sure. So exposition is a tricky thing. I would go, first of all, I've done a 2-hour class on this, so search in our YouTube channel and you can find a really great class on exposition. But I'll just give you a couple of the greatest hits tips. So the first thing you can do is make sure that your characters have something else interesting to be doing as they are talking. It's not just they're standing face to face in a room and saying, as you know, the Gith Empire has been at war with the Mind Flayers for 10,000 years. First of all, that's something that if two people already know it, and if they need to say something like, as you know, then clearly that's not a conversation they even need to have. So I would first of all find another interesting thing for the characters to be doing. They can always be, instead of we do the briefing at the office, we have conversations, we drive to the crime scene, then we do investigation at the crime scene. You can always have that conversation on the way to the crime scene, or while we are already at the crime scene. One of your characters shows up late. They're like, "Hey, everybody, so sorry, I got an fender bender on the way to the accident. Catch me up." And then maybe there's a little pressure added on this character because they are being forced to quickly get caught up and figure out what the crime is, who was murdered, all these things. Maybe they have to whisper because the boss is right over there. There's a lot of great exposition dialogue like this in the movie Terminator, where, for instance, we have a lot of info to kind of communicate that these are robots from the future that are coming back to kill this woman named Sarah Connor because she's going to give birth to a guy named John who will become a resistance leader in the dystopian, the dystopian hellscape of 2050 or whatever it is. There's a lot of exposition and ideas to get across, and there's always another sense of pressure on the characters as they are communicating these things. For instance, Kyle Reese and Sarah are in the car. They're hiding from the Terminator, and she's like, "What's going on? Who is that guy?" He's like, "He's a robot from the future." But they have to keep it down because he's looking for them. And so we have something else going on in the scene, another sense of conflict, another ticking clock or thing that is forcing your characters to act with urgency. There's another scene we have where Kyle is being interrogated by the cops, And he's like, it's never going to stop. It's not going to stop until it kills Sarah. And he's being, like, restrained by the cops. They think he's crazy. And so he's yelling the exposition. We have, like... So we kind of layered it into otherwise interesting scenes. Because exposition on its own is not interesting. But if you can sort of insert it into a scene of people doing something interesting, then it becomes so much more watchable. So that's my biggest tips for you. Add pressure and urgency to your characters as they are communicating the key information. And it will almost always feel a lot better. Here's a question. In my script, I want the killer to get away for a sequel, but I want it to be from prison or after her trial, but before prison. Okay, is this a... I'm not sure what the question is here. Maybe the question is, how do you go about doing that? You could always include sort of like a post-credits scene. People love those nowadays, where at the end of the script, you do write the end, but then you write an additional extra scene that maybe is like after the credits, ... and you have the little teaser of what will happen next. You can do that. That's allowed. Otherwise, I mean, there's not much you can do after the script is done, or after the story is done. Well, you can always, when the climax is over, there's always that moment of, the monster sticks its hand out of the rubble. It's not actually dead. You can kind of suggest or imply that the villain will get away or has gotten away or something like that. Besides that, you really don't need to be setting up a sequel too much. Most movies don't get sequels unless they are big franchises in any case. Oh, you say you love post-credit scene. That's great then. You can write one of those. They're a lot of fun. All right, other questions, topics, story problems you guys are having with your rewrites? Quick reminder, you can go to scriptcamp.net to sign up for unlimited membership, which includes access to every single class on every server that we have here. Novel writing, TV writing, feature writing, language learning, coding, graphic design, game design. We have so many different servers with lots of different classes and different skills. So we'd love to have you guys for more. If you want to sign up, you can get 40% off if you're subscribing yearly. If you're subscribing monthly, it will be just $29 a month. That has access to every event on every server, over 100 hours of classes every month, with exclusive chat channels, video library access, and huge discounts off proofreads and consultations. Scriptcamp.net. Sign up for unlimited membership. And, Nacho Discord bot coding class starts soon. That's cool. That's exciting for me. Question from Colin. How long is the script swap session? Maybe Nacho can answer that.
Yeah, so it just depends how many people are there, but usually just a few minutes, depending on, like, if it's like 3 people, okay, we arrange like a round robin swap, and then here's the scripts. You just take it, you have a week to read the scripts and give you come back next week and give your feedback, or, in this case, because we're doing this just to help the rewrite class, you can just like give your feedback, if you want to just send notes, or we can meet like next week at the same time if that's easier for you.
Thank you for that.
The Tuesday script swap session usually is about an hour. That's every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific.
And that's for just getting a partner, or that's for the feedback as well?
Yeah, so basically first we give the feedback from the last week's scripts, then we arrange the swap, and then you come back next Tuesday. But yeah, if you want to do it right now after, if you submit your script, then we'll have a little bit of time right after this class. I don't think it'll take more than like 20 minutes to go through everyone's scripts.
Thanks, Nacho.
Yeah, great, Michael. Upload your script using this Google form, and the more people we get, you can also, if there's enough people, you can maybe get 2 different sets of notes, which is cool. That's a great way to get, because it's hard sometimes to get people to read your complete script. But so if you read 2 other people's scripts, 2 people will read yours.
Okay. And last question: is it today or on the 14th? That's today, right?
Are you talking about the script swap, Halo? Yeah, it's right after this. We're gonna do a swap. So be sure to upload it now if you want to.
In 30 minutes. Okay, question from Luke. Tips on a pacing pass. When to pause or lengthen a bit for clarity's sake, or in general, how to make each beat feel the same length we'd see it on screen. Make each beat feel the same length we'd see it on screen. I'm not sure what that last part means, but you can either clarify, or I can just take the first part of this to begin with. So, tips for pacing pass, when to pause or lengthen. Go ahead, Luke, if you want to clarify.
We read Cobweb the other day, and the pacing was just sort of the length of each action beat was sort of how long you'd expect to see it on the screen, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's a word for that. It's just not in my brain right now.
So are you, in your outlining, are you including page numbers on your scene cards?
For screenplay, I have not included page numbers in my outline for screenplays yet. More just like Act 3, break into, general idea, but not specific page numbers. I don't work well with page numbers and word counts and stuff. It's just a work of my personality.
I see. Okay, well, that's my number one tip, is to plan more. And in the outlining, this is what I do. In my outlines, go through every single scene card has not only the title of the scene, but also the pages that I want it to take place on. So in doing that, you're able to assess your pacing quite well, because you can determine, are these going faster than I thought they would be, or are they taking too long? And you can also plan out you can determine how much work each scene needs to do, and then early on you can sort of assess how many pages would I give that moment. And then if it turns out that all of your estimates are off, then you'll just adjust your process in the next one, and you'll say, okay, maybe I just take less pages than I thought to do these moments. Or maybe you'll say, I'm more long-winded, and I need to kind of adjust with that in mind. But I think that in even the outlining, I would determine how many pages each scene would require, and then account for that early on. So you can, that way, the whole time you always know if your pacing is on point or if your pacing is falling behind.
Okay. I guess I can add page counts after the fact, after I do the draft.
Sure. Yeah, you can add them in your re-outline.
Yeah. All right. As far as the individual beats themselves, let's say you have something really hard to describe, but it takes place fairly quickly, but it's still clear enough for the audience to see it. How do you kind of bridge the gap between quick pacing and accurate description in that instance?
How do you bridge the gap between quick pacing and accurate description? So, what's the moment that's so hard to describe?
I mean, let me pick a specific example.
Because I'm struggling to even think what's so hard to describe that you can't do it within a couple action lines.
Let's say there's a reveal with a lot of visual information.
Okay.
Maybe a room that has several key details that the audience could digest in the matter of a second or two, but would take a bit to describe each individual thing.
Well, at that point, there's kind of a problem. And the problem is that the screenplay is intended to replicate the feeling of watching the movie on screen.
Sure.
But the experience of watching that wouldn't be the person pausing it and noticing all the details and everything. So you have to kind of account for that in the writing. It's weird, but it's like a jet pilot goes by and he's got a bunch of...
a better example.
Okay, go ahead.
The Thing. There's a scene where, a person's chest opens up and his, head detaches and sprouts legs and all this.
Mm-hmm.
It happens let's say you had a scene like that happened more quickly, but and you still had a bunch of details that the audience would see happening. How would you kind of handle that pacing wise?
You wouldn't include all the details because you're only going to include the things that the audience would notice and perceive. If you're including things that the audience wouldn't notice and perceive on a casual, normal watch, then something's off. So, for instance, this is a dumb example, but it's like a train goes by, open train car goes by, and it's got a bunch of elaborately detailed paintings inside. In a script, you wouldn't say, the train goes by, and the first painting we see in the split second that it passes is Michelangelo's bridge over the water, whatever it is, and you go into all this detail in the first painting. And the second painting you see is this. That just wouldn't be the experience of watching it. The experience of watching it would be, the train car goes by in a blur. So you kind of have to like always go by the audience experience of enjoying the thing. Although we are writing this in a written form, we're creating it is a visual medium. It's weird because we are creating a purely written form of a visual medium. And to that end, it's like the movie's happening in your reader's head, and all we're doing is we're kind of orchestrating the movie that's happening in their head. But if details pass by that would be too quick for an average audience member to perceive them, we wouldn't even put it in the script.
Gotcha.
You might just say, a bunch of fancy paintings go by in a blur, or something like that.
All right.
I've seen other examples. This might help you as well. If you have like a big group of characters to introduce, for instance, you have your whole main cast is in like they're all posing for a picture on page 1. You don't have to introduce everyone right away. And in fact, it's a little easier if you don't. For the most part, it can
How
be a
would
little...
you handle that?
Go ahead. So
I have an
Go
opening with a van full of characters that have to be introduced, and I feel like it is definitely breaking the pacing to introduce them all.
You would only introduce them all anyway if the camera zeroed in on one of them at a time, right? If we first move in on one of them, and then we linger on them for a moment, then we see the next one, then we see the next one, that would be enough time to fully process and understand who we're seeing. But if it's just a wide, if it's just like a wagon full of outlaws, then that's how you can describe it. A wagon full of 8 filthy outlaws pulls up to the bank. You can totally just write that, and maybe you put, if you really want to say these are our main cast, we'll meet them soon, you can include a little note that says that if you want to. You don't have to do that though.
Okay.
For the most part, you can introduce a group as just a group. You can say a group of high school students of diverse race and body types, all approaches. Something like that. You can just describe the group generally, and then as the viewer would sort of come to recognize and meet these people, so imagine the camera lingers on them, moves in on them, or they do something noteworthy or interesting, that's when it just makes a natural moment to sort of introduce them one at a time. You see this sort of thing in horror movies all the time. All the friends are in a car together at the beginning, right? It's like 4 college students are driving to the cabin in the woods. Go ahead.
A character list at the beginning, or is that for like stage plays, or
you can't
sort of
you can't do it. You can't do a character list,
Okay.
unfortunately. It would be useful in some scripts if you could, but it just is not part of the medium. No one's going to be flipping back pages in a script. You have to imagine that they're flipping them forward at a consistent rate, and that every time they have to go back and check something or read something, that's a mistake on your part. That is not, unless obviously they're on their phone or something. And if they're not paying attention, they're not paying attention. But a reader that is paying attention should never have to turn back pages.
Okay. So you can't just introduce your cast on page 1 and then start the story. Like,
No,
okay.
Unfortunately. And I would recommend reading big ensemble scripts that don't do this to see how it's sort of done on the page. As Craig Zoller, who writes pretty big ensemble horrific westerns for the most part, will remind you who people are when you meet them again later. He'll be like, they run into this guy, the doll maker from Act 1, or like the blank from the saloon. He'll sort of remind you what's going on or who somebody is specifically, even if he's already introduced them. Because there's like 15 main characters.
I could do with a lot of that, because I have a lot of characters.
Have you read The Brigands of Rattleforge?
No.
One of the best scripts ever written. Go ahead.
I'm 80 chapters in The Lonesome Dove. You gotta stop giving me things to read.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's a script at least, so it'll be a shorter read. It's like 140 pages, but it's like short compared to a novel at least.
True.
I hope I answered your question. I forgot what the original question was, but
No, that
I
answers
think
my
we got
question.
to it. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you for asking. Looks like we have a comment from YouTube. From Steve Ferris. Hi, Steve. Steve says, I hear different contests want different types of scripts. In the Big Five, do you know, could you tell me which ones they're actually seeking? So I have placed in top 10 of Launchpad, Nicholl quarterfinal, Nicholl semifinal, and Sundance second round. I've done that with historical horror thriller, surrealist dark comedy, and a gory horror drama. Do those seem like the sorts of things that Nicholl or Sundance are actually looking for? I don't know, not really. But at the end of the day, if the writing, it's like they're looking for good writing, blah, blah, blah. The one, I would just say to lean away, if you're entering contests and you really are planning on going the contest and fellowship route, the one thing to actually kind of really avoid would be comedy. Because comedy is really hard to get to place in like contests and stuff with, because usually people are reading scripts for like readers for contests and stuff like this. They get paid by the script and they're getting like $30 or $40 per script, and they're reading them kind of as fast as possible. And because of that, sometimes humor is more difficult to come through, or people are in different moods every time they pick up the script, or different people just think wildly different things are funny, whereas we kind of all agree on things that are dramatic. That's not always true, but like I think more people agree on things that are dramatic than people that agree on things that are funny. And so, if anything, just write something that's not comedy, probably, and you will have a better chance of winning contests and fellowships. That's not to say there aren't comedy scripts that win these things. They do sometimes, but I think only a couple comedies have won the overall in Nicholl, for instance. And it's just really objective, or subjective, I guess I should say. And it's considered a little bit out of fashion right now, so people there aren't as many proactive readers and seekers of feature comedies, for instance. Feature comedy is sort of in a dead zone at the moment. So that's my one tip for you. Just anything but comedy. And if you can write elevated genre, like, if you can write elevated contained thrillers, then you are already in the best possible position. And elevated contained horror, also really in right now. But then again, that's not like all they're looking for. So if you can do those things, they have a good chance, but you're not guaranteed anything, obviously. We have a question from Michelle. Why is Nicholl so great? Nicholl is run by the Academy that runs the Oscars, the Motion Picture Academy of America. It is the biggest and most prominent screenwriting contest in the world, and the most important managers and agents pay attention to it. Here's a question. What's the name of the script, one of the best scripts we were talking about? Oh, I think I was talking about The Brigands of Rattleforge. I'll write the title in the chat because it's kind of hard to spell or remember. The Brigands of Rattleforge by S. Craig Zoller is one of my favorite scripts. It's an epic, horrific Western, I guess I would call it. Maybe ensemble would need to be in there somewhere. It's an epic ensemble, horrific Western drama. It's like more than 2 hours long. It has been in various stages of development since like 2005 or 6, I think. At one point, Tom Cruise was attached to star in it. Now he's not. At one point, Chan Wook Park was attached to direct. I think he's now not. It's been kind of all over the place, and it's it really made his career blow up. It is fantastically written. It's not for everybody. If you don't like dense prose, dense poetic prose, and really brutal violence, you will not like it. But if you do like those things, then you'll love it. Anyway, check it out. Looks like, yeah, you can buy print copies of his scripts from his store for like $2 or $3, and he'll mail them to you. Oh, they're PDFs. There you go. Okay, we have 15 minutes left. I'll take any last questions, story problems, things you're wondering about or concerned about, anything in your script that you would like to ask about. Question from Michelle. Why hasn't it come to screen? Well, it's in somebody mentioned development hell, which is just a period of people going back and forth, disagreeing on stuff, cast or director disagreements, various different creative visions not aligning, and maybe financial and other issues behind the scenes. I don't really know at the end of the day, but this happens sometimes. There's some scripts that people have been trying to get made for 10, 20 years, like Lovecraft, or well, not Lovecraft, like Guillermo del Toro's Lovecraft adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness, which has been in development hell since, I think, like 2005 or 6. Question, can development hell be managed? Yes, it can. Eventually, things sometimes do come out of development hell, but it takes a long time and a lot of work and sometimes a lot of money. So sometimes, yes, it can happen. Nacho says, produce the script yourself. Yeah, that's a good way to get out of it. You just cut out everyone that you're asking for money and just pay for it on your own. If you are M. Night Shyamalan, you're just self-financing every movie and can do literally whatever you want with every movie you ever make. Question from Justin. Should you tone down a script because it's not profitable as your first spec? Do you mean tone down in terms of the budget requirements? Or do you mean in terms of content? And for a budget, I would say, feel free to clarify that question if you want to. But I would say, for budget, okay. If it's your first spec, chances of it getting made are like less than 0.0001%, and you just really need to spend a couple years building your skills before you're writing specs that are considered sellable in the first place. So you can write your first 5 to 10 specs, whatever you want. You will not be inhibited or restricted in any way, because they're not going to get made. Then again, once you get to, I don't know, 10 plus scripts and you're starting to think, okay, now I'm starting to get pretty good, I'm ready to start querying these and trying to maybe package or produce or direct these myself, that's about when I would start to worry about these things. And I would start to tone down those scripts in terms of budget requirements if you actually plan on getting the movie made. And you have to have a realistic assessment of the things that do get made now and the types of avenues that you have for getting those things made. If you look at the things that are like the budget ranges of scripts that are made today, mid-budget is not really a thing anymore as much. $30 to $80 million is like kind of this dead zone. Maybe 30 to 50, I'll say. 30 to 50 is like this kind of dead zone. So you should generally be writing on either side of that. If you want to write actually legitimately producible things, first of all, they should probably be low-budget horror or thriller. Or if you're not doing that, you're just doing writing samples, then write as big as you want, because it's not going to get made anyway. So might as well just write a big sci-fi epic if you must. But yeah, normally that would be my rule of thumb. If you're less than 10 scripts in, don't worry about the budget. If you've written more than 10 scripts, start to tone it down. Less characters, less locations, less special effects, less explosions, less shootouts, less car chases, less vehicles being destroyed, things like that. The fewer people that are involved, the fewer locations, and the fewer props that are necessary for the story to fully make sense, the better for you at that point. The creator was low budget, 80 million. 80 million is not low budget. It might be considered low for a big sci-fi epic, though. Which, normally, if we're looking at the types of big epics that are being made now, is like Marvel movies that are routinely spending 150 to 200 million. But 80 million is not low budget. Low budget would definitely be under 40, like 30 or less, you could argue. But even that's mid. Like, nowadays, low budget means like 1 to 5. I know that some people might call that ultra low, but it's not. Yeah, obviously, the level beneath that is micro budget, which would be sub $1 million. So under $1 million is usually considered micro budget, and low is like one. I'm gonna say 10 would be maybe the cutoff for low budget. But then again, I'm not actually in production or finance or any of these things, so take my financial advice on movies with a grain of salt. I'm more on the creative element myself. Michelle asks, why 10 scripts? Because 10 is about the amount that I usually see people need to write before they start really developing their skills into a professional level. And everyone has a different journey, so that's not going to be the same for everybody, of course. But I have rarely seen a script in someone's first 5 to 10 that has been noteworthy. Michael says, locations, cast, set pieces, special effects and genre are big indicators, but to get specific, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not the best at determining budget. I will say every location you add, every time of day change that you add, every new cast member that you add, every special effect that you add is going to just ramp the budget up. The cheapest movie to shoot is a movie with one person in a blank, unchanging room for the entire time. The next cheapest is 2 people in that blank, unchanging room. So you can see how something like Saw, for instance, was like absurdly cheap to make. Or Blair Witch was like another absurdly cheap movie to make. There's 4 people in the woods. You don't need almost any special effects or anything extra, and you don't need a big name for genres like horror thriller. So that's the nice thing about horror thriller, is that it provides that entry point in terms of people won't only go see horror thriller if it has a big star in it, whereas something like a $100 million action movie, people usually will need a big star. Vivian says, my first script was totally enough to go pro, totally in screenplay format. All right, we'll believe you. I will say my first scripts were not at all professional or ready, because I was writing for full-length scripts in 9th and 10th grade in high school, and they were obviously bad. They were very bad. My first ever script I tried to write was about a stage magician in 1915 who got like contracted to work for the CIA, or for like the early version of the CIA for some reason. I don't know why you needed a magician to be a spy, but for some reason that made sense, or maybe it didn't, but there you go. That's what I was doing. My second script, which was the first one I finished, was a home invasion dark comedy, kind of like You're Next, but way worse. Nobody asked, but I thought I'd tell you. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. I'll take last questions. What if you have a killer setup, but you have a hard time pairing it with a satisfying payoff? Is something that Luke has asked. That's a good question. This should be, first of all, something that reveals itself in the outlining stage, not the pages stage, to begin with. So this is just a premise issue, because a strong premise has both the kind of setup and payoff both included in it. So I would, first of all, not commit to writing something that you don't have a solid payoff for. But the couple things you can do are, one, you can just leave it to cook for a little while, leave it on the back burner, and just kind of come and fiddle with the outline from time to time. Add things to the sketchbook until finally you come up with a good way to start paying off these early things. And then the other way is to really actively work on it. You can open the script, maybe even approach this similarly to how you're going to approach writing pages, where you're like, every day I'm going to spend this long on it, and I'm going to work at it until I crack it and figure out what is the most logical payoff for these setups. So start by envisioning the trailer, start by envisioning the poster, and start with premise scenes, move ahead to ending, and once you fill those out, then everything else can kind of connect from there. Like, you can build forward and backward from premise scenes and ending so that you can kind of construct the best version of the story. I'm not sure how to tell you how to come up with the payoff for the setup beyond just saying, if you're starting with premise scenes, so you're starting with the middle of the movie for the most part, then you won't have this problem as much, because it's easier to come up with a good intro to get to premise scenes usually than it is to come up with, well, what's this movie actually about once I get through the interesting beginning? So I don't know if I have a good answer for this one, unfortunately. How do you make your script not bad? I'm new to script writing, so, well, you read a lot and you write a lot, and you don't skip either of those steps. You have to read 3 scripts a week, and you have to be writing consistently and finishing things and moving on to the next script. Whether that means you are finishing it because you're happy with it and it's complete and there's no notes and it's perfect, or whether that means you've done as much as you can, you concede that you've learned from this, but you may not finish this one, and you move on to the next one. Those are the 3 steps. Read 3 scripts a week. 2, write consistently. 3, finish things and move on. Dan says, put in the work, no shortcuts. Yes, exactly. There are no shortcuts. This is one of the most difficult fields to break into in the world. You have a better chance of playing Major League sports in the NBA or NFL or something like that than doing this professionally for a living. It takes many years and many scripts to get good at this, and once you have gotten really good at this, there are still years of work to go through. Networking, things falling apart, working with many different personalities. It's a very social job. It's a very craft-focused job. It's very technical, and it's combines a lot of different skill sets. You have to really commit to this, you have to really love this, and you have to sacrifice a significant portion of your life to this if you want to get the work done. It's like trying to be a pro screenwriter is like trying to get into the Olympics. It's going to take you a significant portion of your life to get into. If that sounds unappealing, I would definitely do something else. But you can always do, there's other forms of writing that aren't quite as intensive. You can, if you want to write books in your spare time, that is a little more feasible to write over the course of a couple years and maybe come up with a book every couple years. And you could maybe still even have a career writing a book every other year. But if it's less than that, and it's like every 5 years, you're going to have trouble. We have a comment, sounds like a lot of fun. Great, okay, if this all sounds like fun to you, then you're in the right place. If this sounds miserable and like you don't want to do any of this, then there's plenty of other skill camp servers, definitely. But if it seems interesting, just might as well just try it. Just start reading, just start writing, just see how it goes. We have 2 minutes left, so I'll take a last question or two. Any last thoughts? Things you guys want to know about for revision or for the boot camp? Go ahead, Michelle.
Yay, an acceptance. Can you hear me?
Hi, Michelle. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I have it in my earphones. Okay, so I was just wondering, Nacho answered, and it was really cute. He said, get abducted. I can't say it. Adopted by Jeff Bezos, but seriously, if you're on the creative side, and I am too, but I'm just curious if I really wanted to find a way to make my my script about my serial killer cannibal. How money? Let's just pretend I entered contest like you did, and I did really well. But for some reason they say, no, it's too expensive, whatever, we're not interested. And I say, I'm going to go do this myself. Do you seriously go get like a bank loan for this kind of thing? I mean, I just have no idea how you would go about getting something paid for, anything, no matter what it is. Low budget, mid, big. I don't know how would you do that?
Sure. Okay, we'll take that as our last question for today. And Nacho will be able to answer this better than me, but I will say a couple avenues are crowdfunding. So crowdfunding usually will be easier if you've shot a short proof of concept for your feature. So if you make a short film, you can use that to kind of get views and attention online, and then transition from that into a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or one of these websites like this, where you will then be able to raise funds to make the movie. You could also try being independently wealthy or marrying into vast wealth. That might work as well. I'm not sure. What are some other ways people can raise funds to make their movie?
Well, there are just countless local, governments, countries, also little, provinces within countries. Like, the state of Chihuahua in Mexico has a fund. Like there's so many of these. Just try to think about it this way. If the government of, Indonesia or wherever wasn't like providing funds for local producers, that film industry would disappear, because what happens is the U.S. films sort of dominate all the local film markets around the world. They're considered kind of like just films that, normally if you make a film in France, the only people that will usually watch it are people in French-speaking countries. This has kind of changed a little bit in the recent years with the growth of original, like foreign language programming, like on Netflix, that's taken off in different countries. But in general, you're making something for a much smaller market. If you make something in the US, it's for the whole world. So almost every country has some kind of program, and some of them have, like big programs, like where the studios have to pay a lot of money in taxes every year in Brazil, and instead of paying $20 million, they can invest in local films. So then the studio has, if once they get approved, they have like 180 days to actually make a movie in Brazil. And so you see, like, they make a lot of movies that don't seem like Disney movies or Warner movies, but they're made in Brazil for tax reasons, and that they're not that great. A lot of times it's like picking the least worst of 8 terrible projects sometimes. So I mean, there's all kind of reasons why films get made. I mean, look at all the films that get submitted to festivals. This is how many was submitted to Sundance, like 20,000 films or something, and all those films like were made. I mean, some of them cost hundreds of thousands, some of them cost millions, and most of them will never ever get distributed. So beyond the number of scripts that get, like written and nothing ever happens with them, there are a lot of movies that get made and never get distributed, or basically get made and then sold to Netflix for $10,000 or something, but they spent like $1 million to make it. So this is really like, if you just want to have a movie made, you just need money, and probably find a director who has experience. I mean, directors are looking for jobs. Even people who have made a bunch of movies are still struggling to find work. So you find a director. If you have money, you can hire the people to make the movie. You can also hire writers if you need to improve the script or whatever. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of like a tangent, but in general, like, I would not spend any. I would just say to everyone, do not spend your own personal money on any movie. Like, it's just,
unless you're a millionaire.
It's not even. Yeah. Well, I would say, like,
even then,
unless you could unless you're willing to just like set it on fire. Yeah.
There you go.
Spend somebody else's money.
So there's some options for you. Foreign government, what do you call it? Foreign film funds. That's an option. You have crowdfunding. You have social media. Those are all ways to raise money for your own movie. And then beyond that, you can query production companies. You can attach a director by just messaging them, sending them the scripts, telling them about it, asking if they want to get involved. Once you have a director, then you can attach a lead, and then now you're a producer. And now you can start to put the project together on your own. So I'm not an expert, and this is definitely not the place to go for financing advice, but there's just a couple ideas for you. All right. So I think I have gotten a question from Lisa. I will just answer this last question before we wrap up for today. She says, I'm not sure where to put it, so she messaged it to me. How long should it take us to write a script if we work full-time on it? Would I say 2 weeks to 1 month? So that's pretty quick. 2 weeks is actually like a really, really quick time frame for a feature. I would say in the professional kind of world, you're going to be given 8 to 12 weeks to write a feature for the most part. So averaging that, you're going to get 10 weeks. So you want to try to make a process that you can routinely brainstorm, plot, write, edit, revise at least a pretty good version of the script by 10 weeks. So it might require more work after that. That's normal. There will still be more drafts in the coming months, but aim for 10 weeks for your just general process. Thank you for the question, and thank you, everybody. I hope that you all learned something from this. Nacho, feel free to leave any last remarks.
Yeah. So we're gonna just stay in the same channel to do the script swap. So we got 3 people who submitted. So if anyone else wants to, there's still time. Just fill out this Google form.
Okay, yep, so stick around if you want to swap scripts. There's the form right there in the chat. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. Hope this has given you some good info for how to approach rewriting with this very planned, methodical style. If you haven't tried this really organized method before, maybe try it out to see if it works for you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, it can seem intimidating. I mean, like, the first time I saw, like, Conor's approach with all the different colors, I was like, oh my God, like, how... who would do this? Like, why?
What maniac?
Yeah, but all right. Well, I mean, I've seen what Conor's work is like, so okay, I'll try it, and it really helps a lot. Like, it just in general, like, thinking about how to fix your script, it's like, like a chaotic thing. Like, your mind is just not sure, like, exactly do I do this? I just start. You can go in and improve the dialogue and whittle away at little things, but how do you fix the overall story? And I think that's what this approach really does, like, better than anything. You need a way to, like, take it out of your head and put it on paper, so you can kind of, like, figure out what the problems are.
Mm-hmm. And keeping everyone on the same page as to what has changed, what will change next, etc. Thank you, guys. Stick around if you want to swap. We'll see you soon at your next script camp class or event. Have a great rest of your weekend. Should I end the event, Nacho, or will that kick everyone out of the room?
Yeah, we can just